Well, Steve Stratton, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Rider podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, where are we catching you?
Up at a cabin, 9,400 feet altitude, nice foot and a half of snow up here. Nice day to have the fireplace going. Yep, it's my writer's retreat, so to speak.
Gotcha. And where is home most of the time?
Aurora.
So a little change of pace.
Yeah, a little change of pace. I live near 225 and Parker, so it's sort of busy. But I'm able to go across into Cherry Creek Reservoir, and get a little country, so to speak. Yeah, even in the city.
More deer and elk now where you are than probably down at I-225 and that neck of the woods. Yeah.
Yeah, don't see many antelope this time of the year. They're hiding out because it's a little cold, but yeah, the deer and the elk are out looking for something to eat, right? So
yeah,
pretty spectacular here in Colorado.
That's great. Well, we want to get to the book you released last year, which was your first novel, correct? Shadow Tear. We'll get to that.
Yes.
And but first, let's just, you've got quite the background, especially some of your work with the White House, direct work in the White House under two different administrations. Take us through, where did you grow up? What did you want to do? And, how did you end up in the sort of communications career, at least at the outset?
Yeah, so I was born in Northern California, in Eureka. I like to say up in the redwoods. I was one of those kids that just went outside for the day and knew when it was time for dinner and came back. It was sort of like a reptilian clock in my head, dinner time. But during the late 60s and early 70s, actually, we moved down into the Bay Area, down into Fremont. And my dad was going back and forth to Vietnam and stuff like that, and went to high school there. And then we moved back north in the middle of my senior year at Thanksgiving. I tried to say I don't hold a grudge on my dad for that episode, but we moved back north. I graduated up there, and it's beautiful country, but if you're not fishing or logging, maybe a little bit of tourism, or working at the what's now a university, I wasn't that bright. I started looking around what I wanted to do, and it wasn't be all you can be, but I was very interested in seeing the world. I'd grown up with an aunt and uncle who had a National Geographic subscription, so that was my window to the rest of the world, National Geographic. And I was really interested in finding a way to get out and see the world. So I went and saw the recruiters and ended up in the Army. And when I took the entrance test, I scored high. I'm not sure what section. It was a different test than they have now, but high that they I could pick what I wanted to do. And I wanted to go farther north. I wanted to go up into Washington State, be assigned there, and have a little bit of adventure, maybe be in a Ranger regiment, do some communications, some things like that. But when I got to basic training at Fort Ord, another beautiful place to be, Fort Ord and Monterey, California, these guys showed up in suits and longer hair and talked about this chance to travel the world and do some interesting things with communications, and they were sort of tight-lipped about it. And I kept raising my hand all throughout my career. I sort of had the golden horseshoe in one hand and kept raising my other hand to volunteer, and it always worked out. So I didn't really understand it at the time, but I ended up at the White House in a communications agency that was comprised of people from all the branches. We didn't have a Space Force back then. This was a long time ago. But we had people from Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and what I call WACA, White House Communications Agency. We provided communications. Back then, it was basically telephone and radio. I remember when the fax came out and things like that. I'm that old, unfortunately. But communications in the White House, around Washington, D.C., at, of course, at the VP residence, and then like with the Ford out in Vail, Colorado, things like that. So whenever the president would travel, during my time, whenever Kissinger, the vice president, or the president would travel, we would go out in advance and set up these communications networks, primarily for the Secret Service to protect the president. So there was no digital back then. I was called a radio man. So pretty long time ago.
Did you ever get in a situation where the communications and the fact that you had established the networks and the systems that needed to be established, where there was a real crisis, and that system had to be in place in order for a big world drama or some sort of escapade needed to be quickly calmed down or dealt with?
Well, I think there's drama in the White House when the president travels all the time, regardless. I had some friends, of course, not of course, but I had some friends who were assigned to Kissinger, and they were on both ends of his peace treaty kind of running back and forth, between Israel and Egypt and other countries like that. I was traveled like to Poland and other places in advance of President Carter. When President Ford was in Vail skiing, there was always things going on. He was still, world leader, and things were going on. So our networks and telephone and radio communications were important too. That it was important that the staff and the Secret Service could continue to do their duties wherever the president, vice president, and in my case back then, Kissinger traveled. So yeah, it was sort of, things happened, but it was just sort of the job. We were setting up the comms and making sure that the White House worked wherever it was in the world. So yeah,
wow, pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, for a 19-year-old from the Redwoods. I lived in the Bay Area, so I lived through, new terms like hippies and flower power and all that kind of stuff. But and that being anti-Vietnam, the anti-Vietnam stuff. But it was really eye-opening to be around world leaders as a 19-year-old, passing by and trying to stay out of the way, and in the background, things like that. But it sure was a lot of fun.
So just in general, where did your career go after that? What did you do professionally after that?
Well, right after that, it was a very easy transition right over to the Secret Service. So I had not finished college, had a little bit of school, some correspondence courses back then. And so I took a job in what the Secret Service used to call, and I think it still does, the Technical Security Division. So everything from alarms, video, electronic countermeasures, bombs, to just the technical nature of security, which of course now would include cyber and other things like that. But back then it was a lot more physical, so to speak. And one of my jobs was with a team of other guys was to make sure that all the alarm systems, all the different sensors around the White House worked. During campaign years, put in sensors and systems at leading candidates' house, both for and against, when there was finally get down to the last 2 or 3 candidates, they start to get some protection, things like that. Met some interesting people that way. And even back then in my career, I was sent up, for example, to the Eisenhower farm. Mamie had finally passed away. The president passed away long ago, but Mrs. Eisenhower passed away, and I took out a system. It was so old, we weren't going to reuse it, but I took it out of the property. It was government property. I had to go get it, kind of thing like that.
Wow. Wow.
So some interesting cases, and even worked on, I at one point even worked on taking radio systems out of the presidential limo that President Kennedy was in when he was assassinated in Dallas. So,
Wow.
yeah, sobering
Wow.
moments.
Yeah.
But for the
Wow.
most part, it was, yeah. I worked in DC and had longer hair than a normal military haircut. Had civilian clothes. Worked in DC in a place called Georgetown.
Sure.
There were yeah, there was a couple of very nice places to go listen to people play. Just see before he got real famous, Jackson Brown and other people like that, and at the different bars around town or that kind of thing. So it was a great time to be there. But when you travel 300 plus days a year, and your employer can't pay you any more overtime because there's just no more money. It's you got to keep working. It was time for a break. So in 1980, I went on vacation to Florida, primarily to go skydive in the warmer weather, and ended up saying, you know what, I think I'm done after 6.5 years of running around the world. I think I want to slow down a bit. So I resigned and took a job and started taking jobs in Florida, first with Department of Energy, doing security work again. And then I moved into defense contracting at MacDill Air Force Base. So it was a rather nice, easy progression. And throughout my life, I was with one 2-year outage, so to speak. I've been in and or around the military, the Department of Defense, my whole life. I did a couple years in commercial during .com and was in San Francisco a bunch, but that was interesting, but not as rewarding as supporting the folks in uniform.
Gotcha. And was storytelling fiction always in the back of your mind, or was that something that came around later on?
So I love good stories, and I was a sci-fi, Ben Nova, sci-fi person. Dune just rocked my world, so primarily there until I found Eric Lustbader and started to read thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't all that long ago. There was a break, and I always had a book, but I wasn't, actively pursuing any writing or anything like that. I love a good story. I was on vacation and I picked up The Lions of Lucerne, which is echoes very much President Ford at Vail, right? You've got a president at a ski resort, something happens, he gets snatched, things like that, sort of our worst nightmare in reality. And so I love that book. And I had the story in my head. In 1993, there was an event that happened. I had the story in my head that ended up becoming Shadow Tier. In 2019, my wife said, why don't you just sit down and write, between the the Christmas and New Year's break. And that's when I started writing and just wrote out the story. And it was not connected. It was not well, it was pretty well plotted, but not connected. And I knew nothing about writing a novel and what structure should look like and how to open a scene, how to close a scene. I just started writing. And then I got really lucky and I started to get very interested in what's it like to be an author. And I found a mentorship with Jerry Jenkins, who lives in Colorado Springs area. And Jerry Jenkins is the writer that worked with Pastor Tim LaHaye to write the Left Behind series. So, and he's got a whole bunch of New York bestseller books. And so getting a 6-month mentorship with him was an amazing rocket ship type start to actually learning about being an author and what it takes to write a good book that flows and connects the plot points and other things like that. So.
Wow. what kinds of things did you pick up on during that mentorship? What were the main things you think improved significantly?
Well, my understanding that I needed a good editor because I never really learned English. I once again I could tell a really good story, and like Pro Writer Aid will go, "Oh my goodness, what are you doing?" and so I have to use tools there. I use professional help, but in particular, how to edit. Ferociously, right? And because Jerry had been, an editor, a publisher, all the different things that you could think of, I think he's done in the business, and getting the story down, but then tightening it up, right, and making it crisp so that it has power and it projects off the page. I think that was one of the biggest things that I got from Jerry, along with all the different tools he gives a person for learning the structure and what a scene should look like. And even a scene could be broken down in 3 acts, right? And things like that. So it was a really good start. And then I connected with ITW. I connected with Rocky Mountain. I remember the first Rocky Mountain Writers Conference I went to, my eyes were just sort of wide and walking around and getting in classes and learning that I need to continue learning. And I think that's the biggest thing I've taken away today, is that there's no, for Steve Stratton, there's no, oh, I got it, I'm done. Because I will work in a critique group and I'll still put something out that I feel is I'll get all excited about the writing and feel it's good writing. And I still struggle with, I'm very good with a lot of ambiguity. So I don't care if my protagonist name is in the first line or the first time they talk. But a lot of people aren't like that. I figure I'm going to learn it out. That's when some of the excitement of the book, right, is they'll tell me about it later. It'll be uncovered. And, I talk to editors now. They're like, no, let's tell them who the protagonist is. Let's not start with the antagonist in the first chapter. Let's talk about the protagonist. Let's introduce people, in sort of a little more conventional way. So I love learning and being a writer. There's always something to learn, whether it's research or the craft. And so, there are some great people that I've connected with at Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers who've helped me and continue to help me to this day. So.
Very good. So how did you get Shadow Tier then ready for publication, and what was your path to publication?
Right. So I just started to talking to people I could find on Twitter and other places. Early on, Brian Andrews and Jeff Wilson, who do a bunch of different series as Andrews and Wilson, were very helpful. Jeff's very helpful to new veteran authors. So they were very helpful. I started reading, and all the different, watching the podcast and reading the articles about what's a query letter like and all that. And so I started querying, and man, I look back on those query letters and I'm like, oh, I wish I had a do-over there. But I was doing the rounds using Query Manager. In the meantime, while I was writing, I was in cybersecurity in the software side. So I'm good with technology. And so I was using Query Manager and all the tools I could to help myself. But I really didn't know how to craft a tight query letter, right? Mm-hmm. Something that would interest somebody. I could explain the book, but it's like the marketing element, I needed to work on then. So somebody mentioned this small niche publisher who worked with veterans, Force Poseidon. I sent them a copy of the manuscript and they're like, hold on. And then they came back with a 3-book contract. And it took a year. The publisher was very clear with me that it was going to be about a year before from time I signed to the time I'd get published, because he had a backlog of things he was working on. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll keep writing. And
Yeah.
so that didn't bother me. It's not a big contract. It didn't pay for a new car or anything like that, but I got paid some money, and I kept writing. So in 2019, so that was in 21, I signed the contract. And then like by the end of 21, I'd already written Shadow Tier 2, and was writing Shadow Tier 3. And my publisher said, hey, why don't we flip these books around? The first two books are too similar. So we flipped them around. And then finally now, just recently, having gone back to Shadow Tier 2, it's like, ooh, I didn't write very good then. So I had to do a bunch of work to bring it up to my current writing level, capabilities and understanding. And but it is now in with my publisher. So Shadow Tier 1 of the Lance Beowulf series was published last June 14th, I think it was, and had, I've had decent uptake on the book, and it's in all the different categories of, hardback, paperback, digital, that kind of thing. But it was a really interesting in watching that whole process, right, of unfold of, okay, here's my publisher, and he's very small. So, I don't have an Atrium mystery bus. I don't have a Simon and Schuster marketing budget, right? And, I know I'm not that quality writer yet, but so I've worked really hard to market my own book, get it in tattered cover downtown and in the Colorado author section, that kind of thing. And so it's been a really, really interesting. I've learned a lot. And I think I'll be able to do it smarter and a bit better with the next book that's going to come out. So,
What are some of the marketing, or what are some of the marketing tips you've picked up along the way, and how have you got it into bookstores? It takes a little bit of legwork, I assume.
Yeah, it does. And in some cases, I've just sent. In one case, I just sent 5 copies, signed 5 copies of the paperback. Sent some coins, sent some patches, ex-military, we do patches and coins, those kind of things. So, and just sent 5 copies to a bookstore. And, I sort of found out, did a lot of homework about tattered cover and their Colorado author, submission times and different things like that. Other things like military publishers, Military Writers Association, something like that. So there's a lot of people out there where you can get reviews and ways to get into bookstores. And you've really got to hunt for it. It's not like anybody's got a flag up going, come on over here. If they do have a flag up, they usually want money is associated with it. So yeah, and I was trying to do it without having, like I say, a Simon and Schuster budget. So
Right.
I did find a good social media person to help me out. Yeah.
Oh, good. You'll actually hear from the big 5 writers who are signed with the big 5, like Simon and Schuster. They don't do as much with marketing as you might think. A lot of it is still on your shoulders. So there's sort of a myth, I think, about that. Yeah. Unless you're really
it's funny. I thought I'd be better at marketing because I have done product marketing. So like technology products. So I know how to write a brochure, a marketing slick as it's called, but it's a lot different when it's your product and you're trying to get somebody interested in buying it. I spent 20 years in a career honing the craft to get that marketing right. And it's interesting that I've still got a lot to learn about books and different audiences and what appeals to them and other things like that. So,
yeah. Yep. Well, make sure, let's hear a little bit about your story, your main character, and what is Shadow Tier? What's the plot?
Yeah. So Lance Beowulf is a Crow Native American. He and his family are down in Mexico it's the first time he's gone with his parents on vacation in like a dozen years. He's been in the military, and it sort of comes from true life, things like I experienced and a lot of my friends. And they're on the way back and driving north up Route 15, and they stop at a restaurant that a Mexican Army buddy says, "Hey, stop at this restaurant. My brother owns the place, and it's got great seafood." And they all love seafood. So they stop in a restaurant. Unfortunately, somebody has skimmed some money from the Sinaloa cartel, skimmed some product and money, and the cartel wants its money back. And it's an accident that really kicks it off, but there's gunplay, there's gunfire, and Lance and his stepfather run toward the sound of the gunfire to try and help. And that's how they get involved. His stepfather is killed, and then they come after his mother, who's in a hospital, wounded in a hospital. So that's the start of the book. I will say, as I could joke about this now. I can say that I took the easy route, so to speak. I wrote about revenge, which guess what Lance has on his mind most of the time? It's revenge. I try to insert other things, make Lance more human than just maniacal. But as I write second book, third book, I'm expanding on Lance and other things. So I call the revenge book my easy book. Right? But understanding, and I had experience in South America, down in Colombia. I've had experience with the Mexican Army. I've experienced along the border and done missions with the DEA. So I have this experience I can draw on to build on that world that I built that Lance operates in. And I take him pretty far down before I take him pretty far down. And the readers, people can read to see what happens after that, but suffice it to say, there's a book 2. And that was a real experience. And so it's surprising, while I was writing, I hadn't thought about this, but there were really scenes in the book that I wrote that were very cathartic for me, from things I didn't know I was holding on to, from life experience, from being in the military, other things like that. So that was an eye-opener as a first-time author.
Yeah. You definitely can draw on your own experiences, emotions, situations. That's what else have you got, really, in some ways, right?
Yeah. I'm especially if I'm not going to create a whole new world. I mean, that's a crazy thing, right? When you think about it, Frank Herbert had to create a whole world and then put a story in it. So bravo to people that do that kind of writing, right? That create sci-fi worlds and things that make sense. But that capability of writing to actually help you as you write your characters is an amazing part of it. I will say to anybody who's interested in reading the book, it is about the cartel, the Sinaloa cartel. It is about El Chapo. I know El Chapo's in Florence, Colorado, but in my book, the first book takes place in 1998. So we got plenty of runway to chase El Chapo around, so to speak. So.
Yeah. Have you ever read any Don Winslow books?
Oh yeah, I've got Cartel series is here at the cabin. Yeah, absolutely. His stories are, when I compare my book to his, mine's action oriented and revenge oriented. He's got so much more depth of story, right? He's got a whole world that unfolds, and I appreciate that very much. So while there are a few writers like Herbert, his ability to create the whole world and put a story in it, Don Winslow, that you get so much more of a world that the protagonist and the antagonist operate in, right? A richer world, I think. And so that's what I'm working on. My third book is following the ideas of the masters of writing, right?
Yeah, that will come. Just keep reading and keep writing. It'll come. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Excellent. When does the second book come out then?
We're getting close to having those details. Working on the summary, working on the cover page. I've seen a draft, so to speak, of the arc. So we're really close to the details, but nothing to report right now. But it'll be later this year. It won't be June. It'll be later in the year. Probably count my probably third quarter, fourth quarter, end of third quarter, fourth quarter, in that time frame. So
good. And what's the title of the new one?
yes, that there is a title to the new one, and we'll do that reveal when we get the rest of the details ready for everybody.
You're welcome to break the news. You can break the news right here.
We're just short maybe a month of having that all done.
Okay.
Maybe actually a couple weeks. So yeah, I've been working on a cover art, not the cover, but cover art and things like that. So those are some of the funner things, you know, after you get the writing out of the way and all the developmental edit and line edit and all that out of the way, then some of the more fun things are thinking about cover art and other things like that. So very close. Yeah. And love to come back and tell you all about it, but
sure.
It's still in the vein. It's still Lance Bearwolf series is about the drug war, right? And I can say it's not a spoiler that now after Lance, so to speak, gets his revenge, that he's now starting to understand years later that, you know, he's starting to have doubts, right? Is the drug war winnable, right? And some of those doubts start to come out, and very personal parts of his life start to get attacked. So I think it'd be an interesting story.
Good. Well, as we wrap up, we always like to give our guests a chance to just name an author or pass along the title of a book that you'd like more people to pay attention to, just something to kind of pay it forward a little bit and get the word out about a book you love or a writer you love.
Wow, there's a lot of writers I love. Two people, I mean, I just listened to Brad Taylor's Ransom, and Mark Greeny's Burner, and actually just in a sort of a mad rush of 3 days, I listened via Audible to those two books and a third called Dempsey from Andrews and Wilson. They're all just amazing books, amazing stories. But I've got two friends that I think are really going to break out this year with their debut novels. One is T.R. Hendricks. His book is called The Instructor. And then Jack Stewart. And I apologize to Jack, but I can't remember the name of his book. But later this year, Jack Stewart will come out. You can find him online. He's a former Top Gun naval aviator, great guy. He's a pilot for one of the airlines, and his series, I've seen some bits and pieces of his series that he's already writing, and it's going to be another exciting debut from a debut novel.
Great. Well, Steve, thanks so much for jumping on the podcast today. Thanks for all your time, and we'll look forward to the next installment, and maybe we can do this again.
That sounds great, and I hope to see everybody at the next conference.